Deep in the heart of the Great Smoky Mountains, where the mists cling to ancient trees and legends whisper through the pines, a park ranger's harrowing account challenges our understanding of nature. In this first story, we explore a tale of eerie disappearances, spine-chilling creature sightings, and the discovery of a colossal skull, evidence that hints at an ancient cryptic entity lurking in the shadows of these revered woods. I've spent many sleepless nights wrestling with what happened last autumn, and I still struggle to find the right words to share it. My name is John, and I've been a park ranger in Great Smoky Mountains National Park for nearly 2 decades. Over the years, I've witnessed the beauty and mystery of these ancient woods, but nothing could have prepared me for the events of October 2021. It began on a fog-drenched evening when the chill in the air seemed to seep into my very bones. I was on a routine patrol near a little-traveled trail off the Little River area, a section of the park steeped in local lore and whispered warnings. In the weeks preceding that night, there had been murmurs among hikers and hunters about strange figures and unearthly sounds echoing through the trees. I'd once dismissed these as exaggerations born of isolation until I received word that a young couple known to frequent these trails had vanished without a trace. With a heavy heart and a mounting sense of foreboding, I set out to trace their last steps. The trail was overgrown and slick with dew, the dense fog muting even familiar sounds. Every rustle in the underbrush sent a surge of adrenaline through me. I couldn't shake the sensation that something was watching from behind the ancient trunks. About an hour into my search, I came upon a sight that stopped me in my tracks. Near a rocky ledge overlooking Deep Creek, half buried in the damp earth, lay an enormous skull. At first, I assumed it might be from a large animal, but this skull was colossal, nearly 3 feet in diameter, and bore features that were disturbingly not of any known creature in these parts. The brow was high and curved in a manner that evoked images of prehistoric beasts, while the deep, hollow eye sockets seemed almost to glow with an inner light. There was a faint luminescence to the bone, as if it had been touched by something beyond the natural order. I immediately radioed for assistance, but the silence that followed felt more like a warning than a response. In the ensuing days, the park was awash with eerie reports. Local hikers described encounters with a tall, gaunt figure that lurked just beyond the tree line. One group, trekking near Klingman's Dome, swore they saw a creature that moved with a fluid, almost spectral grace, its eyes reflecting a cold, ancient light before vanishing into the fog. A seasoned hunter from a nearby town recounted hearing guttural growls in the dead of night, sounds that seemed neither wholly animalistic nor human. One particularly unsettling account came from a middle-aged woman who often hiked the secluded paths near the park's southern edge. She described a massive silhouette, a hulking, distorted figure with disproportionately long limbs, gliding silently through the shadows. When she mustered the courage to approach, the creature melted away into the darkness, leaving behind a putrid stench of decay and a trail of disturbed earth. Locals refer to this being simply as the ancestor, a cryptic entity believed to be as old as the forest itself, a remnant of a primordial force that has watched over these mountains for centuries. As these reports began to mount, I was summoned to headquarters. In a stark, cold conference room, I was questioned with a precision that left little room for error. My superiors demanded every detail, the exact time, the conditions of the fog, even the slightest nuance in the sound of the wind. Their expressions were stern and unyielding, and it became painfully clear that discussing this matter further was not only discouraged, it was forbidden. I was warned, in no uncertain terms, that I must remain silent about what I had seen, for reasons that were not fully explained. The threat in their tone still haunts me. I know now that the truth behind these events is being deliberately buried. In the following weeks, anonymous tips began filtering through. A retired ranger confided that he had witnessed inexplicable electrical anomalies, glowing orbs that floated above the forest floor, and spoke of a creature whose massive skull was rumored to be seen in remote areas. Another source, whose identity remains tightly guarded, hinted that higher powers were aware of an ancient predator roaming these woods, an entity that had been responsible for several disappearances over the decades. A local visitor, running a small bed and breakfast near the park's edge, recounted the chilling tale of a family that vanished after exploring a cave system known locally as the Whispering Halls. Days later, explorers found scattered remains near the cave's entrance, along with fragments of a skull that bore a striking resemblance to the one I had discovered. Every new account deepens the mystery. The disappearances, the monstrous skull, and the creature sightings all weave together into a tapestry of terror that I can't help but feel is orchestrated by forces far older than any of us. There are rumors of clandestine research and government cover-ups linked to these phenomena, though I've been expressly warned not to discuss such matters publicly. The fear of retribution has silenced many who have seen the inexplicable, and I now find myself among them. I continue to document every detail in my private journal, even as I heed the warnings to remain silent. The forest has always held its secrets close, but now those secrets seem to be clawing their way into the light, demanding recognition and, perhaps, retribution. I'm sending this account to you, Weird Encounters, in the hope that your YouTube channel might offer a platform for those of us haunted by these events. If anyone has witnessed similar phenomena or possesses further evidence of this ancient, cryptic entity, please reach out. We may never fully unravel the mystery, but sharing our stories is the first step toward understanding the dark truth lurking in the Smokies. I remain deeply troubled by the knowledge that something beyond our comprehension roams these ancient woods, and that we, despite all our modern understanding, we are just visitors in these lands. I'd like you to settle in and listen closely as we unravel a story that twists through the frosty backwoods and the hearts of those who witnessed something so unnerving it refuses to be forgotten. Strange discoveries, whispered warnings, and an encounter that shatters the boundary between myth and reality, an unsettling mixture of dread and wonder that might just keep you up at night. Hello, everyone. I'm sending this in because I'm still shaking about what happened, or maybe I should say, what I discovered. And even while I'm typing this, I'm not sure if I'm doing the right thing by sharing it. But I've got to get it out of my head, and maybe someone out there has some explanation that makes more sense than what I keep replaying over and over in my mind. I should start by explaining that I live up near Bemidji, Minnesota. Pretty much the edge of the wild, if you ask me. If you head east into the Chippewa National Forest, there's no telling what might be out there in the dense pines and boggy lakes. Folks around here like to tell the usual tall tales about wendigos and old spirits that roam the North Woods, but I never gave it much thought. I'd heard the stories from my grandfather, who was part Ojibwe, and there's always been talk of these creatures that supposedly get hold of a person's mind. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So, this past September, it was right after Labor Day weekend, I was helping a friend of mine, let's call him David, clear out some stuff in this old property he inherited from his uncle. It's one of those rundown, weather-beaten cabins you'd almost expect to see caved in on itself. It was tucked away behind a narrow dirt road off of State Highway 89, about 20 miles north of town. The place had been abandoned for years, but David wanted to see if there was anything valuable hidden away before we considered hiring someone to tear it down. At first, we found only the usual junk: old tools, rusted-out lanterns, a battered trunk of musty clothes. But in the crawl space, more like a root cellar that leads under the cabin's kitchen, there was a crate that looked different from the rest of the scattered old boxes. It was sealed tight, not with nails, but with these heavy iron staples that must have been hammered in decades ago. It was David who pried it open, used an ancient crowbar that we found in the corner, ironically enough. Inside, packed in dry, crumbling straw, was a skull. It was bigger than a human skull, but not massive like a bison or moose. The jaw was elongated, almost canine, and there were these weird antler-like protrusions at the top. Looked more like stunted stumps of horns rather than full antlers. The eye sockets were huge and set in a way that gave it this permanent expression of hunger. Or maybe just pure malice. We spent half an hour just trying to wrap our minds around what it could be. David wanted to call the local Department of Natural Resources, but something in me said not to. I told him maybe we should ask around first. There's a local historian named Marlene who's known to keep track of old stories and artifacts around Beltrami County. Now, Marlene never struck me as the superstitious type. She's usually pretty grounded, always quoting from official archives at the county offices. But when she came by the cabin later that same day, I saw the color drain from her face like I've never seen before. She called it something that should have been left in the ground. Those were her exact words. She wouldn't even pick it up. She just stared down at it like it was about to leap at her. She mumbled something about hearing stories from her grandmother about a wendigo that supposedly haunted the outskirts of the forest near Red Lake. Couldn't be sure, she said, but it was reminiscent of some legends that the old folks used to whisper about. Then she left in a hurry, saying she had to get going. She left her notes behind too, which is really strange for her. The next couple of days were tense. David locked the skull in the trunk of his car just to make sure no one tampered with it, though the question was, who'd even want it? Or want to steal it, I mean. We didn't mention the find to many people, just a couple of mutual friends, but somehow word got around. Small towns, I guess. Anyway, a week later, David said he'd been hearing noises at night, like scratching around the outside of his garage where the trunk was parked. He thought it might be raccoons. God knows we have enough of them in the area. But his dog, a usually fearless German shepherd named Chico, refused to step a paw outside after dark. This dog used to chase bears off the property, mind you. Now it was cowering under the porch. That's when he started to wonder if we'd unleashed something we shouldn't have. Here's where it gets real weird. That following weekend, a couple of locals, one's an avid hunter, the other's an old trapper who's lived in the region for years, both came across something they couldn't explain. They each said they found partial remains of a deer carcass that looked, well, the trapper said it was picked clean, but not in the way wolves or scavengers do it. He said it looked too precise, almost surgical. The bones were scored with what looked like claw marks too broad for a wolf or a cougar, and the skull was missing. I know that doesn't automatically point to anything supernatural, but combined with everything else, let's just say the talk around town started to get intense. On top of that, we had the lights flickering for no reason at the cabin. An electrician came out to check the wiring, which was basically from the 1950s, so we expected it to be shot. But he said the sudden surges were more like electromagnetic bursts. He had no explanation for that. I remember him joking, "Unless you're running a top-secret lab down there, I can't see why your generator would be spiking like that." All the while, David kept telling me he felt like something was watching him, even in broad daylight. One morning, he swore he caught a glimpse of a gaunt figure out by the tree line behind the shed, tall with these narrow limbs. He was so spooked, he dropped his coffee mug on the deck, shattered it to bits. Chico went berserk barking from inside the house, but by the time David got outside to look, There was nothing. That night, we agreed we had to do something about that skull. We decided maybe the best course was to bring it to the police or a museum. But then we had second thoughts. Imagine explaining to the local authorities that you've possibly found a wendigo skull in your uncle's root cellar. We kept bouncing the idea back and forth, not sure who'd take us seriously. Then we discovered a hidden journal in the same crawl space. Handwritten notes from David's uncle, dated from 1978 to 1982. The pages were mostly about attempts to restore the property, stories of local wildlife, but a couple entries stood out. He wrote about hearing unearthly howls echoing across the lake and feeling compelled to bury an object that had been handed down from his father. He described the artifact as a cursed relic, stained with the hunger of the ancient ones. It's chilling to read in black and white. He said if anyone finds the artifact, they must seal it in an iron box and bury it far from human reach. That's exactly what it had been in. But now we'd opened it. We tried to reach out to Marlene again to see if she had any advice, or at least some knowledge that would help us figure out how to return it or get rid of it properly. But she wasn't answering calls or texts. I finally caught up with her at a small rummage sale on the outskirts of town. She looked rattled, like she hadn't slept in days. She whispered that sometimes the land claims back what was once buried, said we might be dealing with something older and more dangerous than your standard folklore, something the government might even know about. She hinted at rumors from the 1960s about a hush-hush operation near Cass Lake where the Army Corps of Engineers allegedly dug up remains that didn't match any known species. Allegedly, there were men in suits who carted the bones away, never to be seen again. She wouldn't say more than that, except to be careful and to leave it alone. That same night, David called me in a panic. He said something, or someone, broke into his car. The trunk was wide open, but not forced in the usual way. It looked almost like it had been peeled back from the latch. The crate was gone. It was just gone. Nothing else was missing. Not a single rummage through the glove compartment. Not a single scratch on the body of the car beyond the trunk. I asked if he called the police. He said no. He said he didn't want them involved. He was sure they'd think we were messing around. And honestly, I'm just as relieved because I don't know how we could have explained it. We haven't seen the skull since. Now, this might be the end of that particular story, but I've been feeling this weird sense of dread, like it's not actually over. And sometimes when I'm on the forest edge, I swear I see a tall shape flickering between the pines, and my chest tightens with the thought that maybe I brought something down on myself. Or us. I haven't slept well at all. Keep hearing that phrase from David's uncle's journal. Stained with the hunger of the ancient ones. Someone out there knows more than I do. Maybe you've seen something like this, heard about it from a friend or relative, or can confirm those old rumors about secret digs near Cass Lake. And there you have it, a riddle of bone and darkness, whispered through the pines of Minnesota's wild woods. Did our unsuspecting explorers pry open something best left sealed? Or did fate place a dreadful relic in their path to feed a deeper mystery? Perhaps we'll never know. The forest holds its secrets tight, and we who tread among the trees may sometimes witness a fleeting glimpse of what lurks on the other side of common sense and reason. Until next time, stay safe and keep an eye on your basement door.